Okay, so we're on lesson 6 of Plutarch's Lives, Aemilius Paulus. I'll go ahead and read the introduction. Plutarch stretches the story out a lot here, giving detailed descriptions of the arrival of the Romans at Pydna, the sacrifices Aemilius made, and what the troops look like. Like a wise pilot or an orchestra conductor, Aemilius waits for the real battle to begin and then directs the action, and still it has only begun. Before we do the vocabulary, I'm going to ask you what you remember from last time.
Last time, Aemilius Paulus and his army are on one side of Mount Olympus, and then Perseus and his army is on the other. And Perseus has blocked off all the quick routes across. So Aemilius sent some of his men around a longer route to get behind Perseus's army, and those guys they went a different way than they were going to go originally to throw off the enemy. They stopped at a harbor, and then in the middle of the night they marched over to a different place so that Perseus would have originally thought that they were going to be attacking by sea rather than by land. And the Perseus got warned that they were coming. I think there was like a traitor or something. And then Perseus sent some of his men to stop him, but the Romans beat them and are continuing forward.
So let's see here. So we have fortuning happening. Constrained.
Kept from doing something.
Forced. So in this instance, forced. Determine. Decide. Hazard. Risk. Hazard a guess. Risk a guess. Targets. Shields. Phalanx.
Isn't that a formation?
Battle formation of foot soldiers with shields and spears. Yeah, you should know that one pretty well from lots of reading. Let's see, commodious. Handy. It's a commodity. Stayed his army.
Refrain from.
Stopped his army. Foragers.
Well,
in this case, it's those bringing in food and supplies.
yeah. Okay, yeah.
Halberd.
It's a weapon.
A weapon like a battle axe. And bowward. Front.
Yeah.
Alright, so I'll go ahead and read. This conflict fortuning thus, Perseus raised his camp in great haste from the place where he was, and being disappointed in his hope, he retired in great fear, as one is at his wit's end, and not knowing how to determine. Yet was he constrained either to stay and encamp before the city of Pydna, there to take the hazard of battle, or else to divide his army into his cities and strongholds, and to receive the wars within his own country, the which being once crept in, could never be driven out again, without great murder and bloodshed. Hereupon his friends did counsel him to choose rather the fortune of battle, alleging unto him that he was a stronger in men a great way, and that the Macedonians would fight lustily with all the courage they could, considering that they fought for the safety of their wives and children, and also in the presence of their king, who should both see every man's doing and fight himself in person also for them. The king, moved by these persuasions, determined to venture the chance of battle. So he pitched his camp and viewed the situation of the places all about, and divided the companies amongst his captains, purposing to give a hot charge upon the enemies when they should draw near. The place and country was a field fit for the action of a phalanx, which requires smooth standing and even ground, and little pretty hills, also one depending upon another, which were very commodious for light troops and skirmishers, to retire themselves unto being distressed, and also to environ their enemies behind. There were two small rivers also, Aeson and Lucius, that ran through the same, the which, though they were not very deep, being about the latter end of the summer, yet they would annoy the Romans notwithstanding. So, go ahead and narrate for that.
So, Perseus, he's kind of panicked, not sure what he should do. He can't go fall back because if he does, the Romans would go into Macedon, and he knew that he wouldn't be able to drive them out without a lot of casualties, and his counselors and advisors and stuff, they tell him the best thing to do would be to fight, and the Macedonians will be fighting at their hardest because they're protecting their land, and you're going to be fighting alongside them. So he decided that he would fight, and the place that the fight's gonna be is seems like it's fairly flat, but there is some like hills here and there. It doesn't seem like they're that big. And there's two rivers, and I think maybe they were maybe it was like full or something, and that's why it was a problem.
It says, the which, though they were not very deep, being about the later end of the summer, yet they would annoy the Romans notwithstanding.
Okay, so it just caused them some annoyance.
Now when Aemilius was joined with Nausicaa, he marched on straight in battle, arrayed towards his enemies. But perceiving afar that their battle marched in very good order, and the great multitude of men placed in the same, he wondered to behold it, and suddenly stayed his army, considering with himself what he had to do. Then the young captains, having charge under him, desirous to fight it out presently, went unto him to pray him to give the onset. But Nausicaa, especially above the rest, having good hope in the former good luck he had at his first encounter, Aemilius, smiling, answered him, So would I do, if I were as young as thou. But the sundry victories I have won heretofore, having taught me by experience the faults the vanquished do commit, do forbid me to go so hotly to work, before my soldiers have rested, which did return but now, to assault an army set in such order of battle. When he had answered him thus, he commanded the first bands that were now in view of the enemies should embattle themselves, showing a countenance to the enemy as though they would fight, and that those in the rearward should lodge in the meantime and fortify the camp. So bringing the foremost men to the hindmost by changing from man to man before the enemies were aware of it, he had broken his battle by little, and lodged his men fortified within the camp without any tumult or noise, and the enemies never perceiving it. But when night came, and every man had supped, as they were going to sleep and take their rest, the moon, which was at the full and of a great height, began to darken and to change into many sorts of colors, losing her light, until such time as she vanished away and was eclipsed altogether. Then the Romans began to make a noise with basins and pans, as their fashion is to do in such a situation, thinking by this sound to call her again, and to make her come to her light, lifting up many torches lighted and firebrands into the air. The Macedonians on the other side did no such matter within their camp, but were altogether stricken with an horrible fear, and there ran straight a whispering rumor through the people that this sign in the elements signified the eclipse of the king. For Aemilius was not ignorant of the diversities of the eclipses, and he had heard say the cause is, by reason that the moon making her ordinary course about the world, after certain revolutions of time, doth come to enter into the round shadow of the earth, within the which she remaineth hidden, until such time as having passed the dark region of the shadow, she cometh afterwards to recover her light, which she taketh of the sun. Nevertheless, he being a godly devout man, so soon as he perceived the moon had recovered her former brightness again, he sacrificed 11 calves, and the next morning, also by the break of day, making sacrifice to Hercules, he could never have any signs or tokens that promised him good luck, in sacrificing 20 oxen one after another. But at the 1 and 20th he had signs that promised him victory, so he defended himself. Wherefore, after he had vowed a solemn practice of 100 oxen to Hercules, and also games of prizes at the weapons, he commanded his captains to put their men in readiness to fight, and so sought to win time, tarrying until the sun came about in the afternoon towards the west, to the end that the Romans, which were turned towards the east, should not have it in their faces when they were fighting. In the meantime, he reposed himself in his tent, which was all open behind towards the side that looked into the valley where the camp of his enemies lay. Go ahead and narrate.
So the Romans march over and they're anxious to fight, but Aemilius Paulus, he has them stop and he has them seem like they're getting ready to fight, but he's actually just like rotating his men, I guess you could say, and the ones that the enemy can't see are building them their camp and stuff. So the enemy's all, my guess is that he was doing that so the enemy would be all focusing on getting ready to fight and they wouldn't be making their camp. So when night came, the Macedonians are like, they didn't attack us, and then the Romans all had this nice camp set up that the Macedonians didn't even hear them make. And that night there's an eclipse, and the Romans take it as, it doesn't really seem like they didn't seem to be too damn affected by it. This seems like the Romans are more knowledgeable on these things anyways. Well, because it said in Aemilius Paulus, he understood why this happened. So, they tried to, the Roman soldiers, the pagans, they tried to, because they think the moon is a goddess, or goddess. They tried to, guess, bring her back by, hitting things like, hey, we're still here. Whereas the Macedonians, they saw it as a sign of, the king's gonna die. And Aemilius sacrificed 11 lambs. Then he sacrificed 20 oxen and 100. I think it was more oxen, wasn't it? So, killed a lot of animals, but he said that he got signs that they'd get victory.
Okay. When it grew towards night, to make the enemy set upon his men, some say he used this policy. He made a horse be driven to them without a bridle, and certain Romans followed him, as they would have taken him again, and this was the beginning of the skirmish. Others say that the Thracians, serving under the charge of Captain Alexander, did set upon certain foragers of the Romans that brought forage into the camp, out of the which 700 of the Ligurians ran suddenly to the rescue. And relief coming still from both armies, at the last the main battle followed after. Wherefore Aemilius, like a wise general, foreseeing by the danger of this skirmish and the stirring of both camps what the fear of the battle would come to, came out of his tent, and passing by the bands, did encourage them, and prayed them to stick to it like men. In the meantime, Nausicaa, thrusting himself into the balance where the skirmish was hottest, perceived the army of the enemies marching in battle, ready to join. The first that marched in the forward were the Thracians, who seemed terrible to look upon, as he writeth himself. For they were mighty made men, and carried marvelous bright targets of steel before them. Their legs were armed with greaves, their coats were black, and they marched shaky, heavy halberds upon their shoulders. Next unto these Thracians, there followed them all the other strangers and soldiers whom the king had hired, diversely armed and set forth. For they were people of sundry nations gathered together, among whom the Paeonians were mingled. The third squadron was of Macedonians, and all of them chosen men, as well for the flower of their youth as for the valiantness of their persons. And they were all in goodly gilt armors, and brave purple cassocks upon them, spick and span new. And at their backs came after them the old bands to show themselves out of the camp, with targets of copper that made all the plain to shine with the brightness of their steel and copper. And all the hills and mountains thereabouts did ring again like an echo, and with the cry and noise of so many fighting men, one encouraging another. In this order they marched so fiercely, with so great heart burning and such swiftness, that the first which were slain at the encounter fell dead 2 furlongs from the camp of the Romans. Okay.
So, when the time for the actual battle came, they're not sure exactly how it started, but either Aemilius Paulus sort of like baited the Macedonians, or the Macedonians attacked some of the Romans' food gatherers. Either way, battle started, and Aemilius went back and forth encouraging his men, and the enemies had they had a bunch of people. There was a lot of people that they hired, and from what I get, it was kind of loud.
Why was it loud?
People were yelling.
Because they were in.
Yeah, and they were in Valley or something. And from what I get, they got kind of close to the Roman camp.
Okay, so the first one was asking, the discussion question here was asking about the reactions to the eclipse of the moon. We already talked about that a little bit. Give a reason why Aemilius was no novice in these things. So,
Perhaps he had seen one before, or I think because he had a really good education from what he read before, so I'm guessing that he was probably taught about that, and just maybe I'm guessing that he probably saw one before, and as you could say, wasn't impressed.
okay. What ways did Aemilius show wisdom as he led his troops?
Well, he didn't, like that. It seemed like he didn't overwork them. And also he made sure that they had a camp before they even did battle, which was important. And also the way he did that whole thing was smart. The tricking the Macedonians.
One thing I noticed just from this reading this time is how he spoke to his troops.
Yeah, this time he seems nicer.
He seems nicer? Well, I think he acknowledges why they want to do things and their drive to do things, but then he gives them wise words because he's been there. He has experience. Okay, so is there anything else you want to add?
Nope.
Okay.